right. My name is Nora Levinson. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Caeden. We do headphones and wearable technology. So just to give you a little bit of context on me personally, my background is in mechanical engineering and product design. I lived and worked in China for about 5 years for a number of large consumer electronics companies doing mechanical engineering and manufacturing work. In 2012, I co-founded my first company, which is called Adopted. It's a line of cases and accessories, mostly for Apple products. I co-founded it with David Watkins, who's my longtime business partner. And what we really found through our experience at Adopted was that we had a kind of unique ability to blend the fashion and technology worlds. We launched with a line of cases. We thought it was just going to be kind of a fun side thing, and we ended up going from founding the company in July to being on the retail shelves at every Apple store worldwide in about 3 months for that iPhone when we launched. So now we're in a lot of different other places. We sell everywhere from Barney's and Fred Siegel to Best Buy, and we realized that we kind of had a unique skill set at that intersection of fashion and technology to be able to build something that we could sell for a higher price point at a Barney's, feel very authentic, but we could also sell a lower price point at somewhere like Best Buy and provide the functionality that people expected. So that goes into how we launched our second company, which is Caeden, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And this is just for the context and background. I'll get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts later of what I want to talk about with you guys. But with Caeden, what we were really looking to do is bring some real technology to the forefront. So with my business partner, David, being more on the design side and me being more on the tech, I always felt really frustrated that fashionable wearable technology or fashionable technology always had to be like 3 generations old tech. So just because something wanted to look good, you weren't really pioneering on the science or the technology behind it. So we launched first with our headphones collection using everything that we kind of knew about how to build a great quality headphone, great acoustic sound, great price point. And then what we're launching right now, we launched in November and we'll be shipping in the spring, is our connected bracelet product. So how Sona works basically is there's a new metric called heart rate variability, which we use to essentially measure stress and overall health of your cardiovascular and nervous system. This is a metric that was pioneered in the Russian cosmonaut program in the 1960s, then was developed into a breathing meditation program that basically strengthens over time your resilience to stress. So there's a lot of really cool research behind it, and we wanted to bring that to market with a product that was innovative in the aesthetics as well. So just overall, talking about the product, we have activity tracking that we do based off of heart rate rather than steps. We have the breathing meditation, which we call resonance, and then the next generation metric is that heart rate variability. So that's what we're bringing to market with our product. So just a little background on me to start, but what I really wanted to talk about is going very deeply into all phases of, how do you take your idea to becoming a real company? So when I first started my first company, I was coming in saying, I know a lot of things about how to build a product. I know a lot of things about how to design, build, manufacture, but there's a lot outside of that can kind of get you caught up if you don't really pay attention and ask yourself the right questions along the way. So what I put together today was basically a list of questions to ask yourself at each stage that you're in based off my experience. And I'll share a little bit of places that we got caught up or things that we learned along the way. I'll focus a little bit more on the manufacturing and retail and logistics side because that's where my strongest background is. So starting from the beginning, who are you and what are you trying to do here? So a lot of people think, I've got the right team, I want to start a startup, what am I going to do? Obviously, the idea is really important. And we all know the build, measure, learn that we talk about all the time. So I think another important thing to look at is who are you, what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are your skill sets, and what do you care about, right? Do you really care about what this idea is, or are you just trying to graft onto something that's a market trend? And why are you uniquely qualified to bring this to market? And I think the important part here is also understanding where your gaps are right? If I looked and said, I'm really good at manufacturing and building products, but I need somebody who can help me with the operations, sales, logistics, I don't know all the details of that. Looking everywhere I've worked in the past and in the industry, how can I find people who can help me with that? And equally, if we're building a product that involves a lot of science, how do we get people on board with us that can help us be legitimate in that space? So for our product, we actually went and recruited the original Russian scientists who'd worked on the cosmonaut program. They're now at Rutgers, and we worked with them to develop this whole program together. Then I think another question under the people is, who are you really building this for? Is it yourself? Are there a lot of other people like you? Why are you doing this? And how many of them are really out there? That's another question, right? Like, if you're building something that's very specific, you have to think about whether or not it'll scale. And if it won't, are you fine with it being a small company that you're really passionate about at that size? And it's really important that you don't just make assumptions at this stage. You have to start finding these people and talking to them to incorporate that into your build, measure, learn process. Okay, so now you've got an idea that you've iterated on, you've talked about your consumer with your customer, you have a team, you feel like you could actually go and do this thing, right? Now you have to figure out, how do I build this into a broader vision and company? So longer term, what's your real strategy with this thing, right? You have maybe a one product idea, but where could you see it going? And how are you trying to change the industry and the world? And again, asking yourself, why are you really doing this? Because it's going to be very difficult to figure out how to be successful. You're going to have to either raise money or find customers really quickly to be able to grow sustainably. A lot of people think, hey, if I start a startup, now I'm the boss, I get to be in control. But you actually end up being kind of responsible for a lot of other people and responsible to a lot of other people. So it ends up being a very stressful experience, and you have to be very committed. You need to be able to articulate why you're doing this very clearly, very succinctly, to be able to tell anybody, in one sentence, why is it that you're here? So this part is actually pretty interesting as well, because we were trying to build a lifestyle brand. And in technology, that is still fairly rare. I think that Beats could be a good example of that. Maybe Skull Candy, a couple of other places like that. But in general, technology companies are about the product first, and then they kind of build a brand around that later. So if you're talking about your core values, that's really relevant. But if you're trying to build a lifestyle brand, there's a bunch of additional legwork that you need to do to make sure that everybody's going to be on message on how they talk about the company. So this means, what's your brand DNA? How are you talking about this externally? Our brand DNA is design, journey, wellness, and balance. So we're trying to help people find balance in their life, and we're trying to use beautiful design and technology to do that. And what are your brand codes and rules? How is the product and how is your brand represented visually when you go out there and you're trying to build your social media accounts, you're trying to build your website, you're trying to build any marketing collateral? There need to be rules for how it's done. Unless you're going to do it all yourself, which I would not recommend, you're going to need to basically build the guardrails for your brand and help your team to execute. If they know what they can and can't do, it's very easy for them to be creative within those guardrails. And then the third part being, looking at the market, right? You could build the best company ever, but if your market is incredibly tiny and not growing, you'll be wasting a lot of effort if you're trying to grow and be kind of a venture-backed size company. The other question is, how are you going to sell it, right? And things may be different right at the beginning. You may change your mind later. But if you ever are considering going into retail, you need to know and understand that business model. And the real question you're asking yourself here is, am I likely to be successful in this market, right? Are you launching, a social media app in a saturated market with limited resources? What makes you special and uniquely qualified to build that? How would you do something differently than people who have way more money than you? Because there's always going to be somebody who can copy you with more money. So here's where we get kind of into more nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, right? What's involved in building this product? So for a connected device, you have the mechanical engineering, industrial design, electrical engineering, firmware, software, data. Do you have somebody or resource, or are you capable of building all of those things? How are you going to do it? Where is it going to be built? Is it going to be in China? Is it going to be US? Is it going to be 3D printed? Are you building with the maker community? Are you doing a kit or something? All of that has to be figured out right at the beginning. What are the development costs? Tooling fixtures, NRE, which is non-refundable engineering costs that factories will generally charge you when you're doing a complex product. Obviously your samples, when you're running engineering tests, and salaries. How much does it cost per unit landed, right? There's not just the cost that the factory charges you, which is the FOB, which stands for freight on board, but there's also the freight and the duties and any royalties that you have to pay if you're licensing technology or a brand. So you need to use all of these factors to build a conservative, detailed budget, not just for the product, but also for the project and the company. All right, where are you going to launch this product? Are you going to sell it on Kickstarter? Are you going to sell it direct, like self-starter? Are you going to go to retail? And if you ever plan on going into retail, you need to figure out what the prevailing business model is for the retailers that you're trying to go into. So for example, to give it more specifically, iPhone cases. Retailers take a 75-point margin. So you need to be able to operate. If you're selling a $100 iPhone case, you need to be able to operate on only making $25 of that and the retail getting 75. If you're doing a complex electronics product, you can maybe get away with 40 to 50 points to the retailer. Headphones are somewhere at about 60, 65 points now as it becomes more commoditized. So you need to know that going in when you're trying to figure out what your sustainable business model is. How will you acquire customers, right? You can't just launch a Kickstarter and say, great, everybody, come here. I think a great example of that is that Coolest Cooler project. When they first launched it, it was December. They didn't have an email list. They didn't even meet their, I think it was couple $100,000 funding target requirement. He used the next 6 months to build up an email list customer base and was able to launch it and be one of the most funded Kickstarters in the history. I think they did over $10 million because of the timing and who they were able to launch with. So basically overall, this is just looking at your product cost and saying, is this going to be viable at a retail margin or for a reasonable cost per acquisition for when you're starting up? Then the question is, how are you funding the company, right? Is it through VCs, angels, seed funds, friends, and family? And I think this is also even more equally important. How do you fund the company? Who wants to fund a company like yours and when, right? There are a million different venture capital funds out there, but some of them are only interested in certain industries. We only do software, we only do hardware. What stage are they looking to fund? How much traction do you need to go in? What other people are in their portfolios that they couldn't fund you, right? So for example, if somebody had Jawbone in their portfolio, they might not want to fund us because it could be a conflict. Seasonality. If you're trying to raise money in August or December, good luck, because nobody's really going to be paying attention, right? They're all on vacation. They have their own schedules. What's your valuation? If you're an early stage company, you really need to have a fairly small valuation to get early stage funds interested in you. If you have a pre-money valuation of over $5 million, then it's going to be kind of difficult to convince any of these guys that it's worth the risk of investing in you. There are certain kind of caps that you can look to get more specifically, but it's something that you have to feel out. And then what are the check sizes of the people that you're talking to, right? You can spend a lot of time chasing someone and find out they write like 25K checks. It's not really a great use of your time. And this is a big one also. What do people expect from you once they give you money, right? Once you've taken someone's money, there's certain expectations of how you'll scale. If you're not ready for that, then it can be really tough because you need to report back to these guys at least quarterly, but often more frequently to let them know how you're doing. Are you meeting targets? And if you're not, then it's going to be really difficult and stressful. So you need to be able to be pretty sure how you can grow it once you take other people's money. So the important thing here is just spending as little money as you can until you find that product market fit. You build the relationships with the venture capitalists early, but don't take their money until you're ready to scale and hit some reasonable benchmarks, or you're just going to be causing yourself a lot of stress. So looking at launch, and this is really where I have the most background, the important thing when you're thinking about schedule is what is the longest lead time of everything, right? Is it tooling? You know, tooling can take 30 to 50 days for plastic parts. It can take even longer than that for metal parts if you're doing complex metal tooling. What are your long lead time components, right? You may find out, for example, in our headphones, it's a 90-day lead time to get the Apple IC in the Mic 3. So if you want to do an Apple-compatible headphone, you have to wait 90 days to get that part. You know, looking at holidays, it's Chinese New Year right now. There's no factories that are going to be able to, you know, do anything for you. Did you build that in? How many are you building? There's the factory, has their MOQs, there's opening PO quantities. You know, how many engineering builds did you plan for, right? Engineering validation, design validation, product validation, and mass production. Each of these would take, you know, at least a month. And if not, if your product's super complex, then probably more. You know, who's overseeing things on the ground? Do you have somebody there? What certifications do you need? How long does it take to get them? Did you remember design packaging? Even a lot of big companies forget to design their packaging. And we've been called in to help a lot of that in the last minute. So, you know, have your partners issued POs. What's their forecast? What are your payment terms? If you're getting paid in 90 days from the customer, but you have to pay your suppliers on cash on delivery, how much are you going to sell and how much money do you need for that? And how can you support your sell-through at the point of sale, right? If you ship 1 million units into a major national retailer, who's going to say anybody's going to buy it? A lot of that can come back to you. That's actually a biggest area of risk. How many people do you have on your email list? And do you have a marketing strategy to capitalize on your launch? Otherwise, you're just shouting into the void. It's really important that you know how many POs to get to make sure your inventory has somewhere to go, and make sure that you have enough people that you're talking to that anybody cares for all of the work that you've done. Really, here's also some more nuts and bolts. Like, how are you shipping this product? Is it ocean, which can take 45 days? Air, which you can do in a week, but is probably 5 times as expensive? Are you going through a distributor or direct? Are you shipping to your retailer's hubs or direct to store? Who's your freight forwarder and what are the terms? Where's your warehouse? Are they capable of doing pick, pack, and ship straight to the end consumer? Or are they just going to sit there and do big orders? Do they have minimum orders that they deal with? And what's your deadline? So what's the planogram date at the retailer? How do you work back to when it's due at regional hubs? How do you work back to when it's due at your distributor? And then how long it takes to ship it? And also, you need to reserve your container space to be sure to get there on time. Because if you're trying to ship 1 million units or 10,000 units, and Apple is trying to ship a new iPhone, you may not have space on the plane for you. So this is like a quick video. It shows our manufacturing process for an iPhone case. It's fairly straightforward case, a pretty simple product, but it involves a lot of complex detail, and that's just one line of that whole previous slide. So this is building out the tooling using copper EDM to burn in the shape, grind down everything to fit. This is the overall injection mold tooling, how it all goes together in an injection molding machine to get the plastic part out. NCVM, which is non-conductive vacuum metallization, to get the metallic coating. And people really don't understand how much stuff is made by hand in China. So going through skiving and changing the overall thickness of the leather, hand assembling it onto the frame. The overall QA quality process, having to go through and check each of them by hand, make sure that everything's adhered properly, and then of course all the packaging. So I'm running out of time, so I won't do too much for the rest, but I think there's a lot of people more kind of capable of talking about this, but it's basically, do people like your product? How do you know them? How are they actually using it? What more do they want? How much inventory do you have? What are your sell-through and run rate? How many units do you have on hand? How many weeks of supply? you need to really watch your inventory levels and make sure that you're not holding on to 10,000 units when nobody wants it. And then basically, when do you need more money? And what are you going to use it for? So that's my overview of everything I've learned building a company from start to finish, and hope it was helpful in some regard. And the slides will be up, I think, online later if you guys want to get into more detail. Thanks. Cool.
So overall, it looks pretty easy, right? Can't possibly go wrong.
Yeah.
So tell us a little more about the company. So thank you very much for
all the overview.
The pitch, and sharing knowledge. Really appreciate it. But tell us about
what we do. Yeah. So I think the product I'm most excited about that we're coming out with now is this connected bracelet. You know, basically, being somebody who's been in the wearable tech industry for a while, at a number of other companies, the thing that I really felt was that, you know, there should be both innovation on these style and aesthetic as well as the technology, but also the problem that all of the companies were really solving that I saw in the mainstream space was fitness and weight loss. Whereas for me, and I think a lot of people like me, a bigger problem was stress and how to find balance. And there's decades and decades of research behind that, but the sensor technology is now just catching up to be able to actually measure some of those things. So when I talk about the cosmonaut program in 1968, the reason that they developed the heart rate variability metric so in depth is because the only information they could get from the cosmonauts in space was an EKG. So they had to figure out how to interpret that to understand more about what was going on with these guys. So I kind of like to joke that wearable technology in 2016 is about the same place that the Russian cosmonaut program was in 1968. You have one metric and you have to figure out how to, you know, go through and analyze it and how you can improve overall performance and mind-body health by, you know, doing these breathing exercises that they developed in the 70s.
All right, so we have time for one question. Hi, I was just wondering if the iPhone case is shown. What is the retail price for that?
So for that product, it's a $39 case. It's our leather wrap case.
So if you would make a decision to manufacture that here in the US, what would the retail price be?
It would probably have to be about $100. Because if you look at the level of manual detail that goes into a product like that, if it were just straight out the injection molding machine, it would be something scalable. But for anything that involves a handcrafted touch to it, it's just really not feasible to do in the US without crazy, crazy costs. Yeah, I'll give you an example. It costs us more to repackage the product when we get a return than the whole product costs. So if we repackage it in the US, literally having someone open the box and put it in new packaging costs more than the entire product, just because of labor.
All right, thank you very much for being here and sharing all this with us.
Yeah, thanks.